this is AOC at South by Southwest with the senior politics editor at The Intercept, as well as TMBS regular. You don't have it? TMBS regular Brianna Joy Gray. You could see her. I mean, she's been on the Michael Brooks show. I mean, maybe 10 times. She's regularly on. And what's so interesting about this is really the fact that, of course, the right is having a tantrum about this, but a certain type of pundit that is attached to the old make-believe system of let's pretend, let's sit down with somebody like Howard Schultz, who has absolutely no political information or understanding. Let's allow him to draw a moral equivalency between Medicare for all and kidnapping children and ripping them out of their arms. This is the full pathology of the he said, she said. One side, says that 2 + 2 equals 5, maybe. I'll even give you, let's say it's 1 off. It's a little bit of a massage. And the other side says 2 + 2 equals 455,000, right? But they both have perspectives. So AOC is going to give a little historical breakdown about Ronald Reagan that is just, this isn't a polemic. This is a objective description of the Southern strategy and the Reaganite political project.
And one perfect example, I think a perfect example of how special interests and the powerful have pitted white working class Americans against brown and black working class Americans in order to just screw over all working class Americans, is Reaganism in the 80s when he started talking about welfare queens. Mm-hmm. So you think about this image, welfare queens, and what he was really trying to talk about was this, he was painting this photo, he was painting this like really resentful vision of essentially black women who were doing nothing, that were sucks on our country, right? And it's this whole tragedy of the commons type of thinking where it's like, because this one specific group of people that you are already kind of subconsciously primed to resent, you give them a different reason that's not explicit racism, but still rooted in a racist caricature. It gives people a logical reason to say, oh yeah, no, toss out the whole social safety net.
Yeah.
And also Reagan talked, I believe, about the young bucks as well, who were benefiting from government. Matt, you do a historically focused podcast. Where did Ronald Reagan announce he was running for president in 1980? Where did he choose his launch campaign?
The Neshoba County Fair, and I'm blanking on the name of the Philadelphia, Mississippi.
Philadelphia, Mississippi, which was, of course, a place where 4 civil rights workers, people who I had come from the North to help register African-American voters and work for the civil rights movement, were murdered. At the time, states' rights, particularly in 1980, were barely a dog whistle. Every single person knew what you were talking about when you said states' rights, because even arch segregationists like Strom Thurmond, that's what they said. It was actually quite rare. Jesse Helms or George Wallace being more at the other end of really coming out and just straight up saying what these people thought in the straight up grotesque, bigoted comments. But a lot of the other prime opponents of preserving apartheid in the United States wanted to couch it in genteel rhetoric. And a core part of that genteel rhetoric was states' rights. So Ronald Reagan in 1980 announced he was running for president in a town where civil rights workers were murdered in Mississippi, and spoke on states' rights. Again, this is an objective comment. You know, like, was President Obama a senator from Illinois before he got elected president? Yes. Did Ronald Reagan run a white supremacy-based campaign? Yes. And in fact, if you go and look in the 1980s, with some differences, because there was maybe a little bit more, although in a much more overall regressive time, there might have been a slight more attempt at plausible deniability when he was in the White House. But just like under Trump, you actually saw a significant increases in hate group activity and groups like the Klan running sort of in tandem with the Republican Party. And of course, he would go on in addition to using race to divide the electorate and attacking African Americans in every way possible, including gutting communities and crime legislation and so on. He also would veto a sanctions package targeted at apartheid South Africa, which by the time late in his administration was so controversial that the Senate overrode the veto, and that actually included a chunk of Republicans. Of course, nothing like that would happen in today's world. So Ronald Reagan is a racist, and what AOC said there should be looked at as, you know, the equivalent of any other politician just having a sort of good basic understanding of modern U.S. political history. And anybody would tell you otherwise is either living in a fantasy world or is a active agent of racism themselves.
100%. And also this goes back to some of my issues with means testing or even sliding scale, right? Because one of the things that enabled Ronald Reagan to exploit these resentments and the divisions within the working class was that the Great Society programs were largely means tested and they were not universal. So I think if we're looking to rebuild some sort of social democratic welfare state, we want to avoid repeating some of the mistakes of the past, especially considering we can certainly afford to fund universal programs.
Definitely.
I found this anonymous quote about this. This is a anonymous Reagan campaign official to the Washington Post. Expressing discomfort with the choice of the location, says, quote, "It would have been like we were coming to Mississippi and winking at the folks here, saying we really don't mean to be talking to them urban league folk."
Yeah.